Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. My name is Skaya. The latest White House talks between President Donald Trump and President Volodymyr Zelensky produced little progress and no new weapon agreement. With long-range missiles off the table for now, Ukrainians are entering a period of uncertainty ahead of Trump's upcoming meeting with Vladimir Putin in Budapest. Joining me now to break this all down is Olena Lennon, adjunct professor of national security at the University of New Haven. Olena, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
What do you think really went wrong behind closed doors during the Trump-Zelensky talks last Friday?
Well, clearly it was a major blow to Zelensky and a major blow to Ukraine as things were going in Zelensky's favor, for the conversation preceding Zelensky's visit in the White House. Very much favored Ukraine as talks about potentially Ukraine being able to buy Tomahawk missiles from the U.S. Dominated worldwide conversations, and it all came to a screeching halt after Trump took Putin's call. And it is clear now that for President Trump, these long-range capabilities for Ukraine were just bait for Putin, and Putin took that bait. So Trump looks at these capabilities as a bargaining chip, as a manipulation tactic, not as a critical capability that Ukraine's survival could potentially depend on.
Do you think that phone call with Vladimir Putin that he had a day before meeting Zelensky changed his mind? Or, what do you think he was already set before Zelensky arrived that he knew that, he wouldn't offer those Tomahawks?
I think so. Trump has a tendency to echo whomever he talked with last. Remember that in previous times, he also repeated this, when he met with Zelensky, and then he came out and said that Ukraine can actually win back its territory. So he made these outlandish, dramatic propositions based on what he heard from Zelensky. And then he takes this bait from Putin. He takes a call from Putin, and he somehow seems to be spellbound by whatever it is that Putin sweet-talked him into. So I do think so. Part of it is Trump's natural negotiation style of sort of being very much in the moment and manipulative. But on the other hand, it's clear that the only thing that matters to Trump is being perceived as a peacemaker, as somebody who can actually bring both parties to a negotiating table. And negotiate a ceasefire, and then that would be probably even more optimistic than's realistic. So the bottom line here is that I think Trump is just really being transactional and manipulative, and his main objective is to bait Putin to further negotiations. To show to Putin that the United States still has escalation advantage and that they have leverage. Unfortunately, Trump gave away that leverage that the United States has preemptively without extracting any concessions from Russia. Mm-hmm. It's a huge concession on the part of the United States to take Putin's call and to legitimize him as a significant player, and also then to meet in a European Union country. So the United States, unfortunately, the Trump administration gave away a lot of leverage that could have been used to extract some meaningful concessions from Putin. And there's absolutely nothing that Putin gave back.
Olena, it's interesting that you say this. I was on a show on Friday, and we were going live while Zelensky and Trump were in the White House speaking. And actually, one of the questions that I did ask my guest was, how exactly is Putin going to get to Hungary? And that's quite funny to understand, right? What do you think?
You're absolutely right. It's an interesting choice, and I think it's obviously very strategic and intentional, because part of the message here is to insult the European Union and NATO by showing them that they're not unbreakable. that it's possible that Putin can actually travel to an ICC member without being arrested, because at the end of the day, it's the great powers and these leaders can decide, can change international rules and norms. So I don't know the logistics of how they will actually navigate all those restrictions, but they seem keen on making it happen, which will be a huge slap in the face to the ICC, to the European Union, and to NATO. We'll believe it when we see it, but at this point, Viktor Orban is playing along and cooperating fully. So we'll see if they make it happen. But so far, I haven't heard any specific restrictions that would prevent them from doing so. Because at the end of the day, even though there's an outstanding arrest warrant, it's up to each sovereign country, the national government of the participating country, to determine if they would arrest an indicted convict. So unfortunately, the ICC is a pretty weak institution that does not have strong enforcement mechanisms to follow through with arrests.
Double standards there. Olena, let me ask you this. How is this whole diplomatic setback being played in Ukraine? How are people reacting to the meeting between Zelensky and Trump?
I think Ukrainians feel a sense of betrayal. It's a major setback and a major blow to Ukraine being able to sustain a pressure campaign from Russia, but also to equalize their negotiating position, not just on the battlefield, but diplomatically as well. At the same time, I think Ukrainians have long been preparing to develop their homegrown capabilities to continue denying Russia their oil revenue and their ability to prosecute this aggressive military campaign in Ukraine. So I think on the one hand, the Ukrainians are disappointed and frustrated, but on the other hand, they're clear-eyed about having to rely on their own capabilities and also on Europeans to backfill capabilities and ammunition that potentially the United States might not be able to provide. So there's a sense of disappointment, but at the same time, realistic expectation for what to plan for in the months ahead.
Olena, what options does Zelensky have now to maintain U.S. backing after, of course, essentially Zelensky walked out, we can say, empty-handed on Friday from the White House?
I think Zelensky should really push for a ceasefire, something that Trump, and really play into Trump's ego and flatter him to the extent where Trump would actually agree to negotiating a ceasefire. I think the momentum created in Gaza plays really well into Ukraine's hands right now, as Trump seems emboldened and encouraged by a ceasefire that he was able to negotiate. I wouldn't call it a peace deal. There's still a lot of details that need to be ironed out, but ceasefire seems to be holding, and that's precisely what Ukraine needs. And they've been asking for Trump to focus his efforts on a ceasefire, not a peace deal with Russia. So I think if Zelensky continues to double down on that language of a ceasefire for Ukraine, then that would be a realistic, next step. And additionally, what Zelensky did very well, and I think he was a very well chosen tactic on his part, is to really emphasize that Ukraine is a strategic partner, that the United States and Ukraine can cooperate on joint defense industrial production, that Ukraine dominates in drone and anti-drone capabilities that the U.S. could benefit from. So I think that could appeal to Trump's sort of general transactional nature and hopefully sway him in favor of cooperating with Ukraine.
So really, once again here, it's almost a chess game between Zelensky and Putin. Olena, you mentioned that, of course, Trump feels emboldened. I am going to ask you, what about Putin following this meeting? Does Russia feel emboldened now? Does Vladimir Putin feel emboldened after, we can say, this the meeting that, honestly, Zelensky walked out with, like we said, not what he had hoped for?
Yes, exactly. Zelensky walked out empty-handed, and that is precisely the outcome that Russia wanted. I think once again, much like after the Alaska summit, Putin came out on top, and he had outmaneuvered Trump, and he outplayed him. Putin continues to stall for time. He just continues to buy more and more and more time, he made no concessions. So I'm afraid that, it doesn't seem as though Trump has learned anything after Alaska, after, much criticism and, constructive feedback that he received for giving up so much of American leverage in exchange for nothing from Russia, zero concessions and zero change on the battlefield. So I'm afraid that it's a repeat of Alaska, where Putin gets the spotlight and Putin gets time, critical time, and Ukraine continues to operate with a lot of uncertainty and not being able to plan their operations without knowing what exactly they will have, how much ammunition they will have, what kind of a range to plan for. So unfortunately, it's a win for Russia. And he seems to continue to outmaneuver Trump and stall for time.
Let me ask you this. Do you think that now Ukraine will be forced into a ceasefire that freezes the conflict on Russia's terms after everything that took place on Friday?
That is one scenario that is very likely. I think there are other scenarios that could potentially happen. But a ceasefire where Russia gets to hold currently occupied territories and freeze the line is a very realistic scenario of going forward. I actually think that might be one of the more optimal scenarios for Ukraine, because that would also allow Ukraine to, take advantage of that operational pause and rebuild their troops and to recover from the losses. And that's actually, even strategically, that is something that Zelensky has been pushing for, is a ceasefire. And I think that is not just a more likely outcome, but probably one that would be optimal for Ukraine.
Optimal, of course, it's a strong choice of words. And finally, I want to ask you, what do you think Ukraine should do next moving forward?
I think Ukraine should continue developing their own capabilities and continue counting on, using their home-produced weapons and drones to hold Russia's offensives and to hold the line, but also to continue degrading Russia's military capabilities and prevent it from inflicting even more damage, especially on civilian infrastructure. So unfortunately, the options for Ukraine remain to continue increasing their own autonomy in defense industrial capacity and their economy. That said, I think the Ukrainians should continue working intensely with the Europeans, because it looks as though increasingly the burden sharing will be more and more moving in Europe's onto European shoulders, to where the Europeans will have to bear the brunt of the burden for sustaining Ukraine in its defensive war. That said, Ukraine doesn't really have a choice, right? Not very little depends on Ukraine, because it is a victim of aggression, so it has to survive. And I think that this is precisely something that Trump doesn't seem to understand, that Ukraine is not an equal party to this war, that it doesn't, the end of the war and peace deal does not depend on what Ukraine does or doesn't do. It depends entirely on Putin. So for Ukraine, the choices remain the same, is surviving.
Thank you so much, Olena Lennon, adjunct professor of national security at the University of New Haven, for breaking it down for us this morning on World Talks. Thanks for being with us. And that's all for this edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm Skaya. Thanks for watching.